Today we're going to hear from Andre Pennington. Andre and I served in the United States Air Force. He currently is an attorney in Arizona, owns an estate law firm, and a wealth management company. Andre, as I know him, is one of my favorite heroes. I personally saw him come back. His hero journey, to me, was like no other. What I saw was a man who was willing to reinvent himself in order to be the absolute best for his kids, for himself, and for his community. Enjoy the show. Thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well, as you know, I've discussed this with you. Our podcast is all about how can we benefit our client, and they are always on the hero's journey. So they have this part of their life where something has happened to them, and it is adversity, and they have to overcome adversity. And so we're trying to find as many people that can speak to that. And when I think of the hero's journey, I always think of you first. So hence why you're number one here. So a little bit maybe about something you'd like to talk about today.
Well, on a hero's journey, number one, thank you for thinking of me. I don't think of myself as a hero. I have a life like anybody else where there's been some trials and tribulations. And my whole mindset has always been like, just tell me the rule set and I'll make it work. So to me, that's in line with what you're talking about. That's what comes to mind.
We had a chance to talk earlier, and people would be under a misconception if they saw where you're at now, success, family, and that's what they saw. They think that maybe that's always been the case, but that hasn't always been the case.
Yeah, so I'll just randomly I'll get a phone call like in something I'm doing that maybe I'm having a little bit of success at, and I oftentimes wonder like, what if I actually told the 100% truth of what they're seeing as the tip of the iceberg instead of everything that happened before it. Like one of the things you're mentioning, I'm thinking in your mind as you're thinking of me in the light that you mentioned is, I had a kind of a rough upbringing.
Yeah.
I know what it's like not to feel the love of your family. I didn't meet my mom until I was 23. My dad was, hit or miss, but definitely not there emotionally for me. I've seen drug use, prostitution, lived in foster care for a while. And just every key moment seemed to miss the mark. That's the start.
Yep.
Right? And then all along the way, realizing like, okay, this is what I want to do. And then realizing there's all this work to do on myself before I can do that thing I want to do. But fast forwarding to today, somebody may ask me, well, how do you do this one thing? Mm. And I oftentimes think, well, I think what you first have to do is work graveyard shift so you can pay for school, graduate, and then go to law school, despite the fact that everything in your mind and body tells you that you can't do that thing because that's not meant for somebody like you. Get through that, pass the bar, become a trial attorney, join the Air Force, spend 17 years there, and go out, start your own practice in the law, not knowing how to do it really. And then let's start at this conversation again. And now we'll start all over again at this one particular thing and try and use all of those experience for this moment. But it seems to me to be unkind, right? Yeah. So I struggle with that, It's funny, you always have this dichotomy going on at all times, right? It's like you want to tap into the victim that always is going to live within, but talk to that victim to rise up and become something other than that for any specific moment that's in front of you.
So when I think about you, I think of you as a force of nature. Like there is whatever obstacle, whether it's a courtroom, so that's how we met. We met in a courtroom in very difficult, on opposite sides. And I learned to respect you because you command respect. Like, whatever your client needed that day and whatever I was trying to prove on the government side, nothing was going to stop you. That's how I remember you. And that's how I see you as you've gone through your whole life. You choose to put yourself in a situation that you believe in, and whatever's going to happen is going to happen, but you will be successful is how I look at it. And another way to say it, at least as I see it, you are not afraid to, in making an omelet, crack a few eggs. And you actually believe that failure is part of your success. Like, I don't see you ever having stage fright, or I know it goes on behind the scene, but you throw yourself into the situation and commit. Where did that come from?
That's a really good question. I've answered that question differently at different points in life, but I think I actually know the answer now. Number one, I don't know the answer, actually. I don't know whether that's something you're born with or not, because I'm just living in my own life, right? But I know where it formulated from. So, like, as I travel back, the one event that's coming up right now is, I remember my dad, like, getting a gun, leaving in his military pants to go get my stepmother, who was strung out on heroin and was prostituting. And he left me with my younger sister. She's 1 year younger than I am. And now I'm in charge in the midst of that. And it's like, we were both scared. But in my world, only one of us had that luxury to act that way. So I learned early on, because my responsibility to my sister was greater than my responsibility to myself, to allow myself to feel frightened, or act, not feel frightened, you feel it, but to act out of that fright. So what I learned how to do was turn that down so I could do the job that was in front of me. In that particular case, is like, be there for her, help her to feel safer in that moment, despite being a child myself. So when I hit these moments where it could be intense, I kind of draw back to that inner strength, or that practice that grew over the course of childhood into adulthood. Kind of mentioning court, right? Since we're talking about being in trial, I have this thing that I'll do with my ring. When I kind of want to, I'll just kind of twist it back and forth whenever my body wants to, like, retreat inside. And then I'll actually tell myself, like, this is not the time for that. Your client needs you here, 100% present. You can't afford to have the luxury of being nervous or being scared or not speaking the message that needs to be spoken in that exact moment. So I use that as a signal to myself to show up, right? And my sense of it is, the more times I can show up for life and I can do whatever needs to be done, the result's going to happen the way it needs to happen.
Yeah, I hear you saying, like, actually reminds me of when Russell Crowe in Gladiator would reach down and grab the sand, like, right before battle. Like, there's no time. Whatever was going on before, there's no time for that. Like, I'm fully present. And that's what it sounds like. It sounds like you commit and you're fully present to whatever you do.
Yeah, I mean, along the way, you learn to take off this mask of, like, you take off the mask and you become who you truly are, right? And it's hard because it requires vulnerability. One of the things I disliked about trial work is that vulnerability hangover after the fact. I've bared my soul to an audience of strangers, both as the jury, the audience, the judge, the client. And it's difficult. And I think that's why some people will shy away from it, right? But we can never step into the light of our moment if we're unwilling to be vulnerable that way.
Yeah.
Right? So going back to the original story, if I allowed myself to be frightened, right, and didn't take off that mask, I would have never known there was a champion inside.
Mm-hmm.
It was an 8-year-old champion.
Yeah.
Right? But those are the things, and then as you make those decisions moving forward, each one you have another thing to lean back on. Right? So now when I'm starting a new business venture, well, I can lean on the last business venture where I felt the exact same things and looked at the success. In fact, just yesterday I was thinking about it, I was like, man, this whole new thing, and I was having the same feelings. And I'm like, but I've never failed. I've never failed. I've momentarily fallen forward, but I've always been able to sprint to the spot, walk to the spot, crawl to the spot, sit and rest for a second, and then get back up and do any one of those things.
That gets to a great point, because I think if somebody looked at the end of your active duty JAG career, Judge Advocate General, and they saw you step into the public defender's office, and that was the end of the story, you'd be like, wow, Andre made it. Like, he really made it. But what I love about life is rock bottom. Like, that, you did hit you hit some success, and you transitioned, though. You went to a different area of life, but I would have said at the time that you were somebody I looked up to as a family man, and you've had to start over there too.
Yeah.
Tell me what rock bottom looks like, because I look at your new life and I'm like, geez, Andre, like, you've become better than I could have ever imagined in your marriage, with your kids, with your business. But the Andre today, if you rewind 10 years ago, it's just not the same person.
Yeah. I do agree with that. Man, that's... I feel like we're all victims to some degree, right? We start out in life and we have like these character defects that we carry on and carry forward. Mentioning trial work, it's something that I took to early on, and had some talent there, and I sort of was thrust into that, like, oh, you're good at this. So it's like, well, I try to get better at it, and we've talked about this, right? It's all of a sudden now your ego is now feeding off of this, right? And eventually the trial became about being the best in the room. And when you have results that signify that, you need more of that. And you're in essence, it's like at one point in time when I remember walking back from my very last trial, and the entire office came to watch, and I gave my closing argument. And I remember the way it's situated in Phoenix is the federal courthouse is like a couple of blocks from the office, and we were all walking back, and everybody was I guess impressed, ranting, raving about the things that were said and the way it was said. And I had this like small transition where it was like I was like taking it in like always. And then I had this moment of like, how did I ever get this good at something that I never wanted to be good at? Mm-hmm. And like, what's actually going on here? And I realized, I could hear the true voice inside of me. Like, this isn't you. This isn't what you were meant to do. And I didn't care anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't know, it was just one moment to the next. Like, I no longer cared about that. I had another moment earlier. Basketball is one of these things that, like, saved me early on.
Before we go there, do you mind if I just
just
real quick, to let go of something people only knew you for? Like, when you walk into a courtroom and you're wearing your JAG uniform or you're in the federal courthouse, they only see Andre who is realized. They don't see any of the baggage that happened before that. Right. So in a lot of ways, giving up that role of accomplishment would be a terribly difficult thing to do, perhaps even the praise. So I'm asking you, what was it giving up that role that was so hard and took so long, but you finally could do it? Why did you stop caring?
I heard Jim Carrey once say that he wishes everybody could realize their greatest desire. For me, I don't know if this is a strength or a weakness, but it's gotten me to places. I think it depends how I use it. But that drive to want to be the best. Well, that's where I was in that moment. And it's like, these are my supervisors saying these things. These are my supervisors coming and realizing they saw something that in their world was something extra special. And that was that moment. Like, you've worked at that point in time, say 8 years, 10 years, and that was the culmination of, that's the moment. And you get there and you realize it's valueless. Right? Like, I've devoted my life to this. I've sacrificed sleep, time with my kids, time on self-development, time on figuring out what I wanted to do, what I was put here to do, conversations with God, conversations with life, all for this thing. And I realized the scope of my magnitude was like this. All of these gifts and talent that were given to me, I chose to use it like this, a funnel that's inward, instead of using it like this, that it maximizes outward. So that's what I think happened. It's like that moment I finally experienced, and it was valueless. You know, the ego couldn't feed off of itself anymore once the realization that there is no value here.
I thought about that for you as well, and I wanted to put this in front of you. I think maybe the moment itself, the trophy, holds no value. And you hear about that, like somebody wins a championship and you're like, the moment afterwards, it's like, I'm the same person. But I watched you on that journey, and it was a journey of self-discovery. And I almost wonder, it's like, for some people, when they realize that moment and they know it's valueless, but they keep going back to it to repeat the same thing so they can hear all the accolades. But for you, like what I'm hearing you say is like, yeah, I learned a lot from that process, and I was ready to do something different.
Well, I had no choice at that point, right? Because when something's valueless, even the negative part of the ego is not going to allow you to continue to do it. So at that moment, it's like I was now on a different path. Now, I expected that different path to look a lot different than it looked, but for the first time in my life, as a young adult, I can now see myself better. And I'm hearing what's going on in my mind and what drives me, and they're not matching up with the moral compass that's inside. And I didn't realize that was going to be a journey of self first. I thought it was going to be a journey of switching over to do some other thing. And instead it turned into a journey of about 5 years of trying to maximize understanding myself and the things that I thought that I could now hear weren't correct, and figuring out how to rewire that to make it more in light with life that was trying to live through me.
What did that look like? So, and I'm specifically talking about, like, I work a 12-step program. I know that you have experience in counseling, therapy, but from an outside perspective, it looked like a lot of tear down, reinvention, exploration from somebody that was seemingly successful. But when I watched it, it was like, all of this was very necessary, Chris. All of these things have to be investigated, and I cannot worry about what the answer is. I have to step into that fear.
The best way I could describe it was this moment here, right? Let's pretend we're in a room by ourselves, right? And I'm looking at my other self. My other self's in the form of a demon. and it's just staring back at me. And I'm frightened and I'm actually scared now. But I have to keep looking. I have to keep looking. But I'm doing it without any coping mechanisms. Nothing that's healthy. I can't hide behind the mask of this super trial lawyer. I can't hide behind the mask of I'm super successful at this thing I do anymore. And instead I'm vulnerable. And that's what I realized. So my first coping mechanism that I wanted to use was to escape. And I realized underneath all of that, I'm actually suicidal. And that's what scared me. I'm going back to a moment where, I'm curled up by myself and I had no value in what I brought to life. And I felt all of that. And I didn't want to be here anymore. But I have my kids, and it's like I felt forced into having to do this thing. And I became willing to do whatever was necessary. So I thought I sought out therapy, and I did. And I made up my mind, acceptance. I cannot do this, right? My only coping mechanism is the thing that's not going to work for my children. So I just became willing to do whatever that man told me to do, that first therapist. And he told me to do all kinds of wild stuff, but I just did them anyway. I've been to every kind of 12-step meeting you could think of. Some I felt like I belonged in, some I felt like I had nothing to do with. And I realized that all growth is good growth. And I just dove in 100%. By the time I got clear-minded, I put myself in inpatient treatment because, again, the coping mechanisms I was realizing, I just don't have them still. And I remember getting there because I showed up and I was grinning ear to ear, happy to be there. And I remember the nursing staff, all of them would comment it you were the happiest person we've ever seen here. But I guess because I knew that what I'm doing here is going to change my life forever. And it did. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about the way I felt. One of the breakthrough moments that I can really think about was I couldn't allow myself to feel. But we had a group setting and group therapy, and it was an Olympic athlete who was paralyzed. And he was sharing his story. And the way it's set up is there's this group therapy, and everybody takes turns. And I remember what he was talking about, and I don't want to disclose too much because I think all of it's personal, so I want to be general. But he was describing what it was like to have a mom who was strung out and having to figure a way to get to the food that's on the counter, paralyzed as a child. And I remember just feeling the sadness for him. But he was talking about it was no big deal. And the moment that stuck out, and then my turn came to share, right? And I shed tears for him. And then my turn came out to share, and it was really good work. A lot of pain came out. But I remember when he was sharing with me, he had tears in his eye for my story. Mm-hmm. And what I realized is we're all holding up mirrors to be able to feel our own pain in that room and to kind of release it out. And there's something very valuable about digging into our stories, however we can connect to feel it. But I was able to connect through other men who are doing something that men very rarely do, and be vulnerable and share their deepest, darkest moments. That was a game changer for me, because on that day I realized I can feel. I now am connected to all of my emotions. So I know what it's like to feel love, to feel sad, to feel pain, to feel joy, and also know that it doesn't last forever. And that's a new coping mechanism, right? Well, with feelings, I'm now connected internally, and I'm able to make now the right choices for everyone in my life. Now, it doesn't mean I make all the right choices every single time, but I get closer to the mark and have a personal awareness of when I'm off a little bit. So for me, if something comes from the inside, it must be done, right? A pure conduit for life to flow through you. And I'm well past any stage of being able to take credit for anything.
Along those lines, like everybody, this podcast is meant for the comeback. And before there's a comeback, I feel like there's rock bottom. But I've loved watching your comeback. And part of that was jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, so jiu-jitsu came at a time in my life where I didn't know I was going to need it, to be honest. It was one of these things that, like, it's funny how life does that for you, right? You make one little half step this direction, another little half step that direction. And every once in a while, there's like this pillow for you to land on nice and safely when you're about to fall. But for me, when I tried jiu-jitsu, it just connected with me and my soul. And there was something about that struggle and that truth. And for those that don't train, it's really hard to explain, but you can think what you want to about yourself and your abilities and your capabilities. And when you get on the mat with another human being who has trained more than you, or maybe sometimes less than you, the truth comes out, right? If you have a big... I remember when I went in there, I thought of myself as a former college athlete. I worked out. I thought, this is going to not probably go my way, but I'm going to hold my own. And one of the first things that happened is I got tapped out by a 13-year-old girl.
Haven't we all?
But I remember the moment when I got matched up with her. I was like, well, this is weird. I'll take it easy. Once I got tapped out, I was like, well, that's not happening again. And it happened again. And it's like you have this ego moment of who you thought you were. I mean, it's this pattern, right? Of who you thought you were, and now the truth is coming out. I've seen a lot of people in my over 7 years of training leave because of that. They can't handle their ego. And realizing you're not who you think you are. But my internal response to it was like, what do these people know that I don't know? That this is the result. I need to understand that. And what may seem like something of violence, or to me is something a lot different, is a constant dose of humility. Every time I get on that mat, I become more and more humble. And you might have a spike in ego, and sure enough, there's going to come a moment that brings you back down. And I love that. I love going through life understanding that we're all fallible. Like, no matter how much time I put into this, I'm a 4-stripe purple belt, and a white belt's going to catch me.
So you were recently on Fight to Win. And so it was a jiu-jitsu competition, televised, and your son was there. I remember you telling me that it was really difficult to show up because it was short notice. You weren't as prepared as you'd like to be, but you thought it was important, not just for you. You had to do it for you, but you wanted to show your son something.
Yeah, so let me start at the beginning of that story. So when I first started jiu-jitsu, one of the first things I did was watch all these wizards that had this magical ability. And in my world, these were untouchable human beings. Well, I went to Fight to Win to watch some of them perform. Some won, some lost. But that moment meant something to me, to see somebody put it all the way out. The ones who lost, strangely enough, hit me more because they had the courage to get up there. And I thought they were untouchable. And to see that there was someone else that could beat them was astounding to me. But then I realized they walked off with smiles and they were happy they did it. And I promised myself, when I get to a purple belt, that I'm going to do that same thing. So I started out training, and let's fast forward to the moment. I've had...
How many years was that? From one moment, the start of jiu-jitsu...
7 years later.
7 years later.
And, so 7 years later, and I'm realizing, like, you know, your stripes kind of indicate when you're going to promote to the next belt. And I'm realizing there's not a lot of room left on this belt.
You're a very mature purple belt.
Yes. But life also happened at that time. So I went from training 5 to 7 days a week down to 3 to 4 days a week in that particular moment. But I had the opportunity to take a last minute fight or match, however you want to call it. And so when I saw it, I saw who I was offered. I looked him up, and there were a lot of things. I mean, he's a game opponent. I think George Zimmerman, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share the stage with you. But he's definitely been in competition training, was ranked number 1 in the state, and younger than I am, weight classes higher. It was a scary moment. But
All the things,
right? But I made a promise to myself, and I wanted to keep that promise. But it wasn't about me. What I remembered when I was a brand new white belt were the people who went up there and won in grace and lost in grace. And it meant the same thing. So the people that I train with and the people that are newer, I had to pay that forward. Like, it hit me in that moment internally, that little voice. And it's like, this is it. Like, I have to do it. So I did it. I was pleased with the result. It went, I didn't get my hand raised in the end. But I was pleased with having done that. Now talking about Jaden, you know, he's playing basketball. And it dawned on me, like, this is a moment that I can teach him something. Not through words, not through a previous story, but to see it right now, the way it looks. And I remember going in the night before, and I just thought, this is a time to be vulnerable so he can see what happens. And I told him exactly how I was feeling. Like, I'm scared. I'm nervous. You know, this guy, if I allow it to happen, is going to hurt me. You know, this is a professional jiu-jitsu match. And I told him, I really want you to watch how I go through this adversity. And I didn't know I was going to do it well, by the way. I did not. I want you to take what's good and learn from it, and take what's bad and learn from it. But I wanted him to know how the start of it is.
Real quick, the reason I love this story is it's just one more Andre Pennington story. I've always known you as the man in the arena. Like, there's a lot of reasons to not show up, and you can think of them. Like, you've literally thought of them and you've expressed them to everybody, but you still go in.
I had to. I don't know how else to explain it. When I get something, it's very subtle. When I get something in my mind, personally, the little me, that's optional. When God puts something in me, that's non-negotiable. And that was that moment. Like, I knew when I saw my heroes on stage that I had to pay that forward. So it's non-negotiable. So I have to do this. Son, I want you to see me on my hero's journey for this moment, right? And a hero's journey, in my mind, is what you are called to do. You have the courage to do, no matter what. So I wanted him to watch it. And I remember So now we're here at the match, right? And I woke up and I got myself to the perfect spot. Like, I'm not kidding. I was ready to perform. And then my match isn't for 4 hours later.
And then life happens.
No, but that's the thing. So you go through it, and then I start doing this adrenaline dump, and I get to the match, and and I'm excited. Another adrenaline dump. Then I see my opponent, and I get nervous. Then I get not afraid. Another adrenaline dump. Then we talk. But I went through it several iterations, and I am not kidding you. What I did not anticipate happening. So another part, it had been I don't know the exact years, 3 years or 4 years since I last competed.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not kidding, before they called my name and played my little walkout song, I was at the bottom of the stairs, like literally jello legs, like just they're shaking and jiggling. And I remember just praying, like, give me the strength to do this right now, And it kind of came like, hey, just use that song to, like, ride that in. So I did my little walkout. I danced out onto the stage. And I could only show up 75%. Like, that's where I got. But I was really proud of, like, that, showing up and seeing my wife, who's also over here, and my son. And I said, you know what, like, win, lose, or draw, this is the moment. Like, and to see the looks on their faces and, dapping them up and high-fiving, that's where the win was. And then George did his thing, and my hand wasn't raised, but I was glad to survive it.
Win, lose, or draw, all of the stories today, you've shown up and something happens. So if you were talking to yourself, like bringing it back, what would it look like if you didn't show up for that match? You didn't show up for an inpatient. You didn't show up for your sister. Like, who would you be? Who do you think you'd be?
I don't know. I mean, I'm going to answer that question really, really honestly.
Is it a person you'd want to be?
No.
I'm going to ask a different way too. On the other side of all of your hard decisions that I've ever seen you make to step into the arena, these are all, like you said, they're all for God, for good. It's non-negotiable. There's been a reward, a blessing on the other side of every single one of them. And my favorite blessing is actually Amanda.
Yeah.
So how did you get to the place where you could make such a good decision? Because it's not luck. It's not luck to see somebody who's going to change your life and be your partner. But if you haven't stepped into any of these other roles, I don't know if you would have seen it.
No.
Or known it was your best choice.
I don't know what it would have looked like if I'd made the different decisions. I imagine it would look very much like my family tree.
Mm-hmm.
I know this, and this is something that I am constantly grateful for. I was able to show up as the exact person I needed to be. I mentioned earlier, like, I'm way beyond the idea that I can do something. When I look at what's surrounding me, I stepped into the light at the moments I was supposed to step into the light. And then something bigger than you is happening. Something that you're incapable of. That's what's happening now. I have a relationship that little me is incapable of maintaining. I have a partner who little me doesn't deserve. Right? And that's the thing about life that I think sometimes we confuse. It's not what I'm doing today. Today matters, right? But something I did 5 years ago made it so today I can make the right choice. That's the grace. That's the grace.
Andre, thank you so much for being here.